Let me actually, let's see here. Okay, Brenda, we're good? Okay, awesome. So let me see. You guys can see my co-editor right here, right? Nice, okay. So again, name is Andrew, and I'm actually part of the school programming team over here at this program, or about this project. I really want to do it for two specific reasons. For one, I know you guys are pretty damn close to finishing up your Nanodegree program for FEND. You guys built a whole lot up to this point. You guys built the portfolio that you guys are going to be sharing with friends and potential employers and those kind of things. You built a lot of games in your browser. The memory game, classic arcade game, not easy stuff. And then you also wrote a bunch of tests, for existing web apps, specifically for feed reader testing. So you guys made it pretty far, and I know that none of this stuff was easy. Want to give a few personal details about myself. For one, I actually wasn't a four-year computer science grad either. I didn't really have that traditional CS education from university. Spent a lot of times worrying, debugging, pulling out my own hair, and just kind of like thinking that I wouldn't really amount to anything, so to speak. So at the risk of sounding a little bit too cheesy on this one, just know that I believe in each and every one of you guys. Just put in the time, and good things are going to happen. So that's how I feel about this. The second reason why I really wanted to do this in terms of building a React project in this workshop is that, personally speaking, I feel like React is one of the most valuable skills that you guys can get out of the front-end Nanodegree program. From what I've seen, it scales super well, and it's one of the most popular libraries out there for front-end development. So if you guys ever use sites like Facebook and Instagram and Airbnb, Yahoo, Netflix, Uber, Pinterest, Atlassian, if you're familiar with the nightmares of using Jira, it's a pretty popular library out there. And personally speaking, again, it's one of the most highly sought after skills these days in front-end development. So just want to give you guys a heads up on that one. I'm really excited about this one, and let's get started here. So just a caveat, I'm not actually going to be building, like Brenda said, I'm not going to actually be building my reads or restaurant reviews or anything like that. I'm actually going to be spending my time demonstrating a different project that uses React. And for most of it, I'm actually not going to be coding. I want the first half hour or so to kind of be, spent on how to build a React project, how to plan out building a React project. So what I wanted to focus on was state, where it lives, how to pass it down from child components to another child components. I want to talk about lifting state. I want to talk about how, what kind of data you want to keep in state. So a lot of things, and hopefully a lot of the stuff will be transferable skills that you guys can use on the MyReads project, on the restaurant reviews project, or honestly any React project you put your hands onto in the future. So let's get started. I'll close this up over here. And I got this wall of text, a lot of stuff in here, but I promise I'm going to be breaking this down piece by piece. So for this exercise, imagine that you're building a section of a sample video game website where we should be able to add users and display users, along with the number of games that he and she has played. So the task at hand right now, it says, we're going to create a React app that lets us add a user's first name, last name, and username. So right off the bat, it kind of sounds like a form that we have to build. And if you went through the React program with Udacity, you can kind of tell that this is going to be a controlled component, controlled form. So it goes on. It says, when a user is added, the number of games that he or she has played is defaulted to 0. Each username has to be unique, so we can't add multiple users with the same username. And when someone actually clicks on the add button, but the username already exists, we want to display an error. Maybe some kind of error message that says, this user already exists, create a user with a different name. Okay, so I'm going to take a few notes here because that's a lot to digest, and I want to be referring back to these notes anyways. So I know right off the bat I got user info, and what it's asking for is, let's see, first name. All right, one of these tries. There we go. We got last name. Got to press escape, and we got the username. Escape. So we need that from the form. We need that for the users of our app to input. And then what else do we need? We also need the number of games played, and that's defaulted to 0. So I'm gonna put that on the side over here as well. Number of games played, and we'll say defaults 0. So again, just some notes for myself because I don't want to read all this stuff again. Just really easy to track. Okay, so it goes on. The app should also display a list of users, specifically their usernames and the number of games that they've played. Again, default to 0. If someone tries to add a user when one of the fields is empty, the add button should be disabled. So right off the bat, I got a few caveats I want to take note of. So as I build this, I want to make sure I put these limits in there. I got I can't add users with the same username. That's going to give me an error. Okay. And then what I also want to do is make sure, and I'll probably do this through some logic here, that the add button is disabled unless all fields are filled out.
Yeah, a lot of people,
okay.
Right?
They're probably just grayed out.
I mean, first just to qualify, and then there's a lot of people you're playing against, man.
Okay. And the last part of our app is that we should also have a button that lets us toggle between showing and hiding number of games that the users have played. So for example, the button can start out by saying this as the button text, hide the number of games played. And then the app can also display in that list, username 1 played 0 games, for example. Clicking on that button should change the button text to show the number of games played. And the displayed username and score can be changed to played asterisk games. So rather than showing, played 0 games or 2 games or 8 games or whatever, it's going to show, it's going to hide the number of games played. So let me put that in there. This last thing I need to build is the button toggle between showing, hiding number of games users have played. And just to give myself an example, so I don't forget, I'm going to say something like, 8 games, and that's going to be star games or asterisk games. So that's what the button's going to do. It's going to toggle between that thing. And I think we're pretty good on that. I don't think I missed any features here. I wanted to show an example of what the finished product should look like. So I got a few examples over here. So on this left side, well, first of all, this is our entire app, right? So on this left side of the app, on this page, you have a form over here. Controlled component, you can be taken in 3 different values from the user: first name, last name, username. And obviously, since I have typed nothing in there right now, it's all going to be grayed out. Okay. And on this right side, you have show number of games played, and you can toggle that for this user list over here. You have one user object with the username property and number of games played, and then the second user object, user B, number of games played, and that's hidden. Check out another example. So when I'm using this app and I put in, first name in there, I'll just call it first day, put in a last name in there, last day, and then username. Username already exists. So even though this button is still blue, I can still click on it because I filled out all the fields over here. I can't actually add this user because we see that from this user list, user A is already taken. And I have this error message over here. So that's another use case for this one. And another case, this is one of the other caveats, is if you don't even fill out the entire form, let's say if I put in a first name, I put in a last name, but I don't fill out any username, this button is actually going to be hidden, or not hidden, it's going to be grayed out. I actually can't click it. So unless every single field is filled out, I can't actually submit anything to this list of users. One final functionality over here, and I want to go back to the original one. So notice how it says show number of games played. If I click on that right now, and notice that it's hidden, if I click on that, it's going to toggle between showing the actual number of games played, and it's also going to toggle this text over here. So whereas before where it says show, it's now going to say hide. So that's another functionality that we want to have in this app over here. Cool. All right. So one more thing. This is not actually part of the app itself, but it's just some notes about state. State management is the heart of React. Allows us to have a single source of truth for application. This means that we don't need to make sure our data is synced across multiple different components. React does it for us. And you guys all learned about unidirectional data flow in this program. Parent components pass properties to child components as props. So one question I get every now and then, and I see it in Slack also, and I also see it in Student Hub, is, you know, why would I ever want to use props versus state, or state versus props, or, you know, what's the difference between props and state? So kind of how I see it is that props are really just properties of some component that are passed in during initialization. Generally, and I mean generally as in all the time, it's pretty much read only. You don't ever really want to have a component change its props. In general, props are really meant to be only used by the parent component to trigger a re-render or some sort of change in the child. If you're not doing that, and let's say if you want to trigger a re-render within the component itself, you should probably just use component state. So that's a major difference between props and state. Props not meant to be mutated. State, it's pretty much designed to be mutated all the time. So that's one big distinction here. Remember that state can't be modified outside the component in which it's declared. If a child component needs to pass some data back to its parent, we'll need to pass callbacks from the component that holds all that state all the way down to the required component. So all the way down the hierarchy from parent to child, the child of that child, and so on. By calling those callbacks, child components are able to pass data to back up to the parents, which are able to modify the states. Props can go through multiple components to get to the component that they ultimately need to reach. Again, so there's a hierarchy, right? Parent to child, to the child of that child, to the child of that child's child, and so on. This practice exercise will cement your understanding of where to put states, how to update and access state, and when to use stateless functional components and control components. So there's a guide over here, Thinking in React. I think it's highly valuable that you guys look at that one, but not gonna spend too much time on that just yet. I wanna jump right into the project. So one of the first steps that we have is it recommends us to break the app into a hierarchy of components and draw a box around each React component. So I can't really draw a box around it right now, but I kind of want to show you what it looks like again on the finished product here. So if you look back at it, this is our site. This is the entire web app. And if you can imagine a box around this entire thing, that's one component that we're rendering. And most of the time we can just call it app. You know, this is our app component. This is the highest level component for this project. So app, it's just surrounding this entire site, this entire white area here. Another component that I kind of see is this form, right? This could be kind of like an add user component, right? This is a controlled component. This is just a form that we fill out. So that's one thing. Another component that I see is a user list, which is over here, you know, this entire right side. And just like if you guys remember from the Build a Portfolio site, if you guys think in like individual elements, individual boxes, you can actually break down this larger right box over here into another box, right? So whereas this is an entire user list, this imaginary box around this list of users, you know, everything below the blue button, you can kind of see that as like a user index, right? These are individual users for your user list. So again, just child components within a larger component, within another component, which is app. So we got that. So let me write that down here. At the very top, we got app. Okay. And then inside that, we have add user. And then also inside app on the same level hierarchy, we got the user list. And then within the user list itself, what it looks like is that we're just rendering the user list index items, which just be user objects themselves. So this is kind of the hierarchy that we're going to be working with, and it should serve us pretty well for the rest of the project. So that's the first step. You begin a React project, just kind of breaking down things into a hierarchy of components. The next, what you want to do is determine the data in our app. So a couple of things here. I know first of all, I'm going to be grabbing 3 things from the user of my app. I want to grab the first name. I want to grab the last name. I want to grab the username. Allow them to select their own username. So that's 3 things from our form. There's a couple of other data pieces that I think we should need. And again, these are not necessarily like, this is not necessarily like the best way or the only way to design the app. This is just one way that I'm implementing it. So just kind of keep that in mind. I want to have a user exists. And the reason I want that is because we have the error message after all, right? If I don't have this piece of data, I can't really tell the user exists. So let me just write that. Okay. Second, we also need users. That makes a lot of sense, right? We need to show a list of users inside a user list, and we also need to determine if user already exists. So having those user objects in there is kind of a no-brainer. What we also need is a user name to display. So not the new one that the user types in themselves, just the username that we render on the user list. And then seventh, what we got here is show games played, because I want to be able to toggle this, right? And I can probably just keep this as a Boolean, keep it true or false, and be able to toggle that value in order to show that user list. And last, what I also need is probably num of games played. And again, that's going to be displayed in our user list as well over here. So that's all the data. Now, this is kind of where it gets interesting. We need to figure out exactly which of that data should be part of our state. And that React document that I talked about earlier, it's actually pretty damn useful for this kind of stuff. It gives you 3 questions you should ask yourself in terms of, should I keep this data as state? Should I, possibly keep it as props? Should I calculate it? So a lot of questions you should ask yourself. Is it passed in from a parent via props? Probably not state. Does it remain unchanged over time? If so, it's probably not state either. If you can compute this based on any other state or props in your component. If so, it actually definitely isn't state because you can just calculate that on your own. So let's figure out exactly which pieces of data over here belongs in state. So let me write state. Okay. So I know right off the bat, we're going to need new first name, new last name, and new username as part of the state. Again, like I've been saying, it's just the controlled component values, right? So I know that's going to live in state for sure. It's going to be in our form, which is going to be controlled component, which should live in state. That's our source of truth. What we also need in state is our users. So with our users, our list of users will actually change upon interacting with that form that we enter all the stuff over here. So our list of users is going to be mutated. It's not going to remain unchanged over time. So we definitely want to keep that in state. What else should we keep in state? We should keep user exists in state since users are in state. So that makes sense. That connection should be pretty clear. And then one more thing that we need to change over time is show games played. Again, like I said above, it should be toggled anyways. So that's a good spot to keep it within state. 2 things I don't want to keep in state. So I'll say not state, not necessarily going to say props or anything, but these are just not going to be in state. Don't really want to have the username itself in state. And I'm talking about the username that is shown in user list, because that can be computed from just the users part of the state. So I definitely want to keep that out of state. And then number of games played. So again, this is shown in the user list as well. It's over here, the 2 and the 8. And I don't necessarily want to keep that in state either, because again, it can be computed from the users piece. So I'll probably just keep that elsewhere. So this is where a lot is. This is where a lot is the data in state. Cool. Okay, next up over here, it says identify where each piece of state lives. So now that we know what should be in state, where should all the stuff live? Like which components, where should they actually be held within our app? So it says right here from the docs, identify every component that renders something based on states. And if multiple components need the same piece of state, put that piece of state into those components, parentmost component. And actually, this is probably the key point that I really want to make today. So if you take nothing else from this workshop, definitely take step 4 and step 5 in mind, is that if we're having two components need the same state, you want to lift the state into the parentmost component. And if that doesn't make sense, I'll show you visually what it looks like. One of the last things here, if you can't find a component where it makes sense to own the state, create a new component simply for holding the state and add it somewhere in the hierarchy above the common owner component. So again, just lifting up to the very top again. Okay, so let's begin with this. Users. Now, which components need users? Well, I know for sure user list needs the users, right? Because we're rendering the list of user objects. So that definitely needs it. And that's one. Okay. I also know that the form itself that we can call maybe like add user, that definitely needs users also, right? To see if it already exists. Okay. So because of that, because both components need the same state, I want to lift that state to the parentmost component, to the component that's higher in the hierarchy. Okay. So let's look back at it and let's see, what do I got over here? I got add user and user list. They both need the same state. So rather than storing that data inside add user, or rather than storing that data inside user list, why don't we just lift it all the way up to their most common ancestor, the most common parent, and store that state inside app, so that we could just pass that data down via props probably to add user and to user list. So for that reason, let me type that out just to make it super clear. In order for both to access users, we're going to lift up state to their, let's probably just call it parentmost component. And again, like I mentioned, that parent component is going to be the app component. Okay, so that's the entire point. That's the main thing that I see a lot of students get tripped up about, is where should state live, especially if that state is going to be shared, if that state is going to be required from different components. Just throw it all the way to the top, to their topmost most recent ancestor, the most recent parent. In that case, again, it's going to be app. Okay. Let me see. I wanna share my screen on something else here. Okay. Brenda, can we see my browser? Okay. So there's a really good article on the React docs. The React docs are really good, but two articles that speak out to me that I want to share with you guys are Thinking in React, like I mentioned before, Thinking in Components. But the main one right here is lifting state up. So often several components need to reflect the same changing data. We recommend lifting the shared state up to their closest common ancestor. So I'm going to show you guys an example of it, but if you want to see yet another example, this is exactly how it works over here. So definitely take note of this article and look it up later on. Okay, I'm going to go back to my code editor. Okay. So we got the users and we know exactly where it's going to live. It's going to live inside app. Now let's take a look at something else. Let's take a look at all the stuff from our controlled component, our form. The new first name, the new last name, and we need the new username. Okay, so where's that all going to live? And I said it a million times during this workshop, it's actually going to live in the controlled component itself. It's going to live inside add user, because the benefits of using a controlled component is that your single source of truth, I mean those values for new username, for new last name, for new first name, all that stuff is going to live in state. That's going to be your single source of truth. So need a single truth. Form is a controlled component. Cool. So that's where it should live. What else do we got here? we got user exists. Okay, user exists. Now, where should that one live? Would probably make sense to put it in add user also. And for the same reason, actually, we need that single source of truth because the form is a controlled component. That's where that should live. And the last one, what do we got? Show games played. Where should that piece of state live? So that one, let me see here. I know two components needed for sure. First, we need the user list. That one needs it for sure. Because for one, it determines the button text for hiding and showing the games played. And two, because user list actually renders the user component, which needs access to this piece of state anyways to know if it should, if it should show the number of games or hide it. So I got that in there. And user needs it too. So let's look at our hierarchy and kind of see where we should put that state. Where we should put the show games played. So based on our hierarchy and from our conversations about, lifting state and putting up with this parentmost component, we should probably put that show games played data not within user that needs it, or not within user list that needs it. Excuse me, not within user that needs it, but within user list, which also needs it, because we can pass that state all the way down to user. I can also use that state itself as well. Okay. All right, give me a second. Gonna drink some water real quick. Okay, so I think we hit just about everything in here. Let me see. Cool. Okay, so our next step is to, let me minimize this. Okay. Next step is to add inverse data flow. So it says here that state should be updated inside a component where the state lives. If we pass state down from component A to component B, and then we need to update that state based on something that happened in component B, we can do so via callbacks. So what's going to happen is that component A is going to pass state to component B, but while doing that, it's also going to pass a callback that will fire when that state should be updated. So I know, honestly, that's kind of wordy. So let me break this down a little bit. So inverse data flow. What it really means is that since React is since React involves unidirectional data flow, we need to implement inverse data flow if we want it to go the other way. So inverse data flow. If we need to, let's say, execute something in the parent component. But the problem is that we need to access data from the child component. Okay. But remember what I said earlier, right? Parents can pass parts of state down as props. So along with that, parents can also pass callback functions as props. So this will allow the child to pass data back to its parents that way. So just to kind of recap all this, since state can't be modified outside the component where it's defined, meaning that, if you have add user, you can't just have the add user component. You can't just have that form add a new user to the list in the app component state where it lives. So how you can fix that is that you can have the app component pass a callback to the add user component through some prop. You can probably call like an add-on user. And then when that new user is added, add user is going to run the callback, which lets the new user be passed to app. So a lot of stuff. I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Okay. Give me a sec. Oh man, my voice is running out a half hour into this. Oh my god. Okay, we got this, guys. We got this. Let's start coding. So let me close all these for now. Um, and let me just kind of say again that the code that I'm about to show you guys, it honestly really doesn't matter, right? I mean, it's not like you're going to be using this code in your projects or anything like that. It's not like the syntax matters. What really matters and what I want you guys to take away from this is how we're working with state. You know, how we're lifting state, where state lives, how to pass down state from a component to another component via props, how props work in general, how to plan a React project. So those are the things that I want you guys to focus on. You know, these are the main concepts. Again, the code that I show you guys, I'll share it with you after this webinar ends, just so you have a copy of it, just so you can interact with it. But again, the code that I write really doesn't matter. It's not one-to-one relevant to my reads or restaurant reviews or anything like that. But if you want to look at it, I'll make sure it gets out to you guys. So let's start out. I'm gonna open up app.js over here, and assuming that I went through scaffolding a new app via create React app in my terminal, this is kind of what you get. You're gonna get a lot of boilerplate. You have like the logo and all that stuff, just a simple H1 that says React. So this is what the page looks like right now. Let me actually remove like all the stuff because I don't really need it. So right now it's an empty render function. Probably don't need that thing either. Okay. So what exactly do I want to render in the first place, right? Well, first let's start out with state. We know that in the hierarchy over here, let me jump back. Okay. That I need to have user objects passed down from app to add user to user list. So let's do that. Okay, users. And we're going to probably just store those user objects probably in just the format array. Okay. What I usually like doing, and I probably should have said this before, is that I kind of like building top down in that I write the components at the very top that I know I'm going to need, and then I'm going to start building out those components. So it kind of gives me like a good skeleton of what to work with. So again, I know from app, I'm going to need this component and I'm going to need this component. So let's do that right away. Okay. Add a div in here. And inside that div, I want to have this component rendered that I have yet to build. And I want to have a user list component that I have yet to build also. So what props am I passing down? Well, again, since we talked about how users should live in the topmost component over here, since we're lifting state, I need to pass this data of users. I need to pass a state that lives inside app to these other components over here, to these child components. So what I want to do is add a prop onto there that I can access from that component when I do build it. And I want to pass down the state as a prop. Okay. And I know, again, user list needs that as well. So I'm actually going to copy that exact same code and give them access to it. Okay. One more thing that I know the add user component form needs is a way to create that contact, right? If I'm going to be adding a new user to the state from this component, I actually need a way to handle that, right? So let's have a handle over here. Let's call it on add user, and I'm going to pass in this callback. I'm going to pass in, what should we call this? Should probably call this like create contact or something. This like create contact. Oops, there we go. Okay. So I think that's pretty much it. Sorry, excuse me. That's pretty much it for the render function itself. App should be pretty basic, but what I have yet to build is this create contact function up here. So let's do that. Okay. I have create contact, and it's going to be a function just like everything else here. Okay, build a skeleton for that. And what I want to pass into this create contact, I want to pass in the user itself, right? Because that's what I'm going to be getting from this component, add user. So let's pass in the user. And when this user first initializes, I want to be able to set a property on that where their number of games played is 0. Because if you remember over here, when you first create a user, the number of games that he or she has played is defaulted to 0. So I'm going to make sure that happens right away. So I'll say user that I pass in, and number of games played, set that to 0, just right off the bat, because I know it's going to be true. Okay. Second, what I want to do is change the state. And by changing state, all I really want to do is just make sure that the user that we pass in that gets created is appended to this array. So how I'm going to do that is doing this.setState. And remember, you don't ever want to do direct changes of state. State is really what matters for React to know that you're re-rendering the component. So if you just set state directly, like this.state and assign that to something, React isn't necessarily going to know that, right? So you definitely want to use this.setState. Okay. So this, we're going to be passing in a callback, and that's going to return an object. And what we want to have in here initially is the current state. So I'll probably just call it curState. And what I want to set is the user's property. And here I'm going to use a spread operator to get all of the current users. So curState.users, which should just grab everything that already exists in here. And then what I want to append to it is the new user, right? The user that we created over here. So if I got this correct, this should be just about it for the app component. Okay. What else do I need to do? Oh yeah. We gotta make sure that add user and user list are imported correctly. The components I'm about to make. So import add user from, I'll put it in the same folder over here, add user, and then I'll do the same for user list. Cool. And I think we're good. Okay. Let's jump into creating the user list itself. So I'm going to do a new file, userlist.js. Cool. Okay, so starting from blank, but we got this. We're going to do import React and destructure components from React. Got that. And I guess before I forget, I know this is going to render the user component itself. So I haven't built it yet, but we'll do import user from /user. Okay, cool. Class user list extends components, and let's start building this out. So what I want to first do is just kind of like the same thing for the last one. I want to initialize my state, right? So I'll say state, and what lives in here is the show games played. Is that right? Let's see, show games played. Should be in step 4. Yep, there's the user list. Okay, hold on. There we go. Okay, so I initialize my state, and what I can start doing right now is just start building out the render function. And I'm sure it's going to need a lot of event handlers, those kind of things, and I'll build that later on. But at least I want to give myself a skeleton of what the render function should look like, and then we can go from there. So render, got that. The piece of data I need are show games played and users, which I can get from 2 different sources. So let me just do this real quick. Destructure that from state. And again, this is just a really quick way for me to do, show games played and use show games played as a value inside this render function, rather than typing this .state.show games played every single time. So just a quick shortcut for myself. The same thing, I'll need to grab users that I'm going to be getting from props. So this .props, got that. And what I want to do first is actually build the button. Build the button and write some JSX for the button that toggles showing and hiding the player's score. And we're actually going to render this conditionally later on. So what's that going to look like? I'm going to store in a variable. I'll probably call it like games played button or something like that. Okay. And then I'm going to return some JSX. So let's give it a div, wrap up everything in a div. And let's write that button. Okay. So what should the button text actually say? So first of all, I know that showed games played is meant to be toggled. We have a Boolean over here and it starts off as true, but I want to be able to show different text depending on that state, right? I want to say hide or I want to say show depending on that state, depending if it's true or false. So let me do some conditional rendering here. Show games played, and we're doing a ternary. If that's truthy, meaning that if it's true over here, we're going to say hide, okay? And if it's not, we're going to say show. So again, just a quick little trick to show different UI based on state. And then the rest of the string over here is show the number of games played or something. Okay. This button isn't going to be functional unless I have a handler on it. So let's go ahead and do that. On click, what should it do? It should toggle. So we'll say this dot toggle games played panel. Okay. Yeah, let me see. I think we're pretty good on that. Okay. In terms of the UI that we want to return from this, let's write that JSX right now. Again, wrap everything in a div. And let's say if I want to give it like a little nice header over here, I'll say this is our list of users. And part of the conditional rendering is that for this user list, if there are actually no users, we don't want to display anything, right? I mean, it doesn't really make sense to show the games played button if there are actually no users because no one's played a game. So what we can do here is I'll write another ternary users and users dot length. The array is greater than 0. Okay, if that's all true, we should render this button. Because again, it doesn't make sense to show that button if there are no users. And if that's false, if there are no users at all, if it's a falsy value and the length of the array is actually 0, what we should do is probably just render nothing. And what that can look like is just an empty string. We'll just render an empty string, to make it simple. Okay. Now, in terms of the list itself, let's go ahead and actually create an ordered list. Okay. And what I want to do is take the users that I get from props, take those users and then map across the entire thing and create a user, show the users component for that. So what's that going to look like? Got users dot map, and map takes in a callback, so I can keep it pretty simple. Got that. And what's map going to return? Well, I want map to return a user object, again, that I haven't built yet. I imported up here that I haven't built yet. And that user object is going to have a few different attributes on it. So let's write that right now. Okay, what do I want? Give it a key, just so that React doesn't yell at me when I create a list with no individual identifiable keys. Username. Okay. I want to pass in user as well, and I want to give it a prop for show games played. Okay, and then we can assign that to the state that we have in this app, in this component, show games played. Cool. Let's go ahead and export this. Awesome. Okay, so that should be our component right there. Next thing is we want to move down. We move down to the next child component over here, and let's build out the user component. Okay. Okay, so the next thing. So kind of like what I said earlier, since this user component actually doesn't hold its own state, because if we take a look at our hierarchy, it grabs everything from above, right? It doesn't really need to hold its own state. It can just grab stuff from user list. And if we need anything from anything higher in the hierarchy, we can just keep passing it down, by parent to child, parent to child. So for that same reason, we can just make this a stateless functional component, because again, this element doesn't need to hold its own state. Recall that React components are just functions that return UI anyways. So if that's the case, we just write a simple function for this. So this one should be pretty quick. React, okay. And let's create a function. That's our user. We're gonna pass in props directly. And let's return something here. Okay. So what do we want to return? Let's return a list item for our ordered list from the previous component. And okay, we can give it a p tag. Just a little nice heading over here. Username. Okay. What else can we render? Oh, inside that username, we can render, well, the username. Okay. And let's create another p tag. Let's show number of games played. And let me do something kind of hacky over here. Let me give myself a space to interpolate that. And what I want to do. So if show games played, this value, let's see if I can scroll. If show games played, this value over here, if it's truthy, I can actually render the number of games played. And if it's not, if this value is false, I'll just render an asterisk just to kind of hide the number of games played. So let's do another ternary for this. Show games played. Ask it a question. If yes, I want to render props.user.num game is played. And if not, I want to render an asterisk. Cool. So let's export this. Export default user. And we should be pretty good to go, actually, on this. And the last thing we need to build is just the form itself. So let's take a look back at this. The form itself is going to be right under the app component. So let's jump right into that. Okay, control component, let's call it add user. Okay. So same thing. You guys have done this a lot of times already. Okay. Class add user extends components. Great. So kind of the same thing as we did for the first couple of components that we built. We want to initialize a state. So that's usually the first thing I jump right into. States and what I want to hold in the state. This component is going to be a component that adds users to our users array in app. So let me actually grab that in state and have this serve as a single source of truth. So user, I'll have first name, and then it'll be empty string, just initialize it as an empty string. And have last name, empty string, username, same thing, empty string. And then what I also want in state is that the user exists. Again, just so that we have a way to show that error message. So user exists, we'll just say false. Just kind of keep it simple. There we go. Okay. Now, like I said, I kind of like building things top down, building like a little skeleton of what I want to have and then filling out everything later. any helper methods I need, any event handlers and that kind of stuff. So let's jump right into our render function here. Okay. I know I want to grab the first name, last name, and username. So let's get that. Let's deconstruct it. And I'll say first name. I'll say last name. And I'll say username. Okay. Again, just a really quick way for me to do that, so I don't have to type this dot, state.users dot first name all the time. So just ES6 destructuring. Okay. What I also want to have is my return, of course. And in here, let's start off with a div. And in this div, let's give it a quick header, just something very simple. I'm going to say, what do we have over here? I'll just say like new user form or something. Okay. And in this new user form, I'm going to have a form component, and I want to have multiple different inputs in this, because if you look back at this one, we have multiple different fields for the first name, last name, and username. Well, let's build that right now. Wrap it up all in a div. And let's start building out those inputs. So input, have this be self-closing. I want to give it a couple of props. So first of all, I'm going to give it a type. Say text. Got to give it a name. And I'll probably just assign this to first name, really quick. And some placeholder text. So it's a text that already exists when you render the form, just to kind of indicate what should be input into that field. So placeholder, probably just say something like, I don't know, like something like enter first name or something like that. And value, this is kind of where controlled components comes in. This value is going to come from your state, because again, controlled components is your single source of truth for the values of your input fields of your form. So I deconstructed it from state directly. So here, what I can just say is first name. Just keep it very simple. Okay. And of course, I need a handler for this one that I haven't built just yet. So I'll say like on change, I need to do, like this dot handle input change or something like that. Okay. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and repeat this, not only just for first name, but last name and username as well. Okay. Let's say last name, enter last name, username, enter username. Cool. And the same thing, we can actually have the same handler for that, handle input change, that we have yet to build. I think we're pretty good on the form itself. What we should probably do here, I think I missed this one in the beginning, is handle what happens when you submit it. So I know we got to build this dot handle submit. Okay. Okay. So let's start building out these things. Handle input change. Handle input change. I'm going to pass in the event itself, the click, because it's an event handler. Pass in the event itself, and let's work with that. Let's change some of the state. Deconstruct name and value from event.target, just to make sure we capture exactly what the users type in. And then we want to set state. So kind of the same thing as our first one, this dot set state, rather than setting the state directly, reassigning the value directly yourself. That's going to take callback, and that callback takes in the current state, and it's going to return an object. And what that object is going to look like is the entire current state and the user that we're going to have in there. So same thing as the first component that we built, first state.user, and we're going to make sure the name corresponds to that value. Okay, so that should be it for handle input change. Next, we want to build handle submit. So what actually happens when you submit the form itself, right? What kind of logic governs that? So let's build that. Handle submit. Okay, event Whoops, print. Okay, we're running close on time here, so let me speed this up a little bit. We want to prevent the default actions of the event. So make sure we get the exact output that we want. So prevent default. And what I want to do is check if this contact exists, because I actually don't want to run any of this code for handling submit. I actually don't want to add, the user itself if the user itself already exists, right? So let's build that out over here. User exists, and do a quick check before you run any other code in this. Contact exists. And again, I haven't built this out just yet, but it's going to be necessary. What I want to check is this .state.user.username. So we're checking if that username already exists, and that's how we can trigger that error message from showing. Okay. Say if this user what's this saying is that unless this user exists, we're going to be executing the following code. So what I'm going to say is this props on add user, and then pass in state user. Cool. So this is kind of something I missed from Ruby. I originally programmed in Ruby. So it's saying like unless the user already exists, meaning that it's in the database, meaning that it's in the user list, unless they already exist, add the user. So that should be a good check for us. And again, we'll just set state here. And then this time should be pretty simple. What we want to do is just change the value of user exists. Cool. Okay, now what else do we have? Okay, I got my contact exists. Oh yeah, let's build out contact exists. Okay, so this is just a quick check to see if the username already exists in our states list of users, specifically their username property. So we can say contact exists. Okay. Pass in the current username. Okay, and then let's grab our users so we can change that later on. And let's do a for loop over here. So for, and I'll say like let user of users. And as we iterate that, what do we want to check for? We want to check if the user.username is equal to the current username. And if that's true, return true, meaning that this contact already exists. Now, if we iterate through the entire thing and we actually don't find a username that matches the current username, let's just return false, meaning that the user actually doesn't already exist. Cool. So the last thing over here is building out that button. Let me see. I think Brenda, we're running close on time here. Should I run like 5 minutes more, or?
I'm good with that if you are.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. It's 2 more steps. Let's build out the actual button that should be disabled or enabled. So this button over here, it checks that these fields are filled out before it allows you to click add. So let's build out some of that logic. Okay, I can probably just dump it right at the bottom of the form here. So I'll say button. Okay. And this button text just say add, as it says over here. And I want to give this button a prop. It's going to be called disabled. And if you haven't seen this one just yet, it's just a quick attribute. You can check it out on MDN. It's just an attribute that indicates that the user can or cannot interact with a button. So if this Boolean is true, the user actually sees this button as disabled. So let's build some logic that that supports that. This dot is disabled. Again, I'm building a lot of stuff that I'm writing a lot of stuff that I haven't built just yet, but let's take note of that. Okay. So what should that is disabled function look like? Could be pretty simple. All we're going to do, let me write this out over here, is we'll first deconstruct everything. So I grab my first name, grab my last name, grab my username, and that's all going to be taken from state. This dot state dot user, I believe, is what we had in there. Okay. And if any of these are blank, meaning that first name is blank, last name is blank, username is blank, if any of them are blank, we're going to make sure that button gets disabled. We're going to make sure this function returns true. So let's use the pipes over here to check that out. First name. If that's nothing, that should return true. But that's not it. You know, if last name is also, or not also, if it's blank, got to make sure this returns true. And the last thing, if username is blank, we should have this function return true. So again, if the first name is filled out, that's great. Last name is filled out, that's great. But if username is blank, we're going to make sure this entire thing returns true to disable that button. Okay, so that function should be fully built out for that over there. And the very last thing we want to do is check if the user exists. So let's build that. Now it should be pretty quick. It's going to be outside of our form, and we're going to render something conditionally as well. So this dot state dot user exists. Okay. If that's true, you want to return a p tag, and that'll just be a little error message. We'll just call it like, you cannot add a user that already exists. And if this value is false, then we'll just render an empty string. Cool. So that should be it. If we render all this stuff, what should that look like? Okay, give me a sec. Okay. Okay. You guys should be able to see my browser right now, but this is our finished product. So if I add a name in here, I'll just say A, and A. That adds it to the list just fine, right? But let's say if I were to leave out some of the data, I actually can't click this button. This button is actually disabled. And that's because of that is disabled function that we had earlier that disabled the button itself on the page. What if I try to add the same thing again? If I do that, it gives me an error. You cannot add a user already exists. So again, I know this is a lot of stuff. The code is actually pretty dry, but like I said earlier, this code really shouldn't matter. I just built this out so that if you're watching the video later on, you can kind of have like a project to look back on as an example. But the code, everything I just said in the last half hour shouldn't really matter. The main part that does matter are the concepts behind it, right? Where should state live? Which parts should be state? How are you lifting state and those kind of things? So all the notes that I typed in right over here, I'll make sure you guys get that as well. And I feel like if I were a student, I would actually take note of this part over everything else here. This is just another sample project that I, hope you guys can use as a resource. But again, this code really shouldn't matter. Okay, and with that, I think we're good to go.